Ambassador Viralthus stood at the viewing port of his diplomatic vessel and watched the blue planet grow larger with each passing moment. And his 4 compound eyes blinked nervously as he studied the swirling white clouds and vast green continents below. He had spent 3 lunar cycles preparing for this mission, reading every file the Galactic Council had compiled on the species called humans. And yet he still felt unprepared for what awaited him on the surface of Earth. "Ambassador, we are beginning our descent," announced his pilot through the ship's communication system, and Viralthus clicked his mandibles together in acknowledgement. Behind him, 11 other members of the Corvani collective shifted on their segmented legs, their crystalline exoskeletons catching the light of the nearby star that humans called the Sun. They were diplomats and scientists and observers, all chosen for this historic first inspection of humanity's homeworld. The Galactic Council had debated for decades about whether to grant humans membership in their ancient organization, and opinions varied wildly across the 1,000 species that made up the Council. Some called humans promising and innovative, while others whispered that they were dangerous beyond measure. Viralthus had reviewed the warnings himself, and he had dismissed most of them as exaggeration. Surely no species could be as strange and unpredictable as the reports suggested. The ship descended through thick layers of atmosphere, and the Corvani delegation pressed closer to the viewing ports to catch their first glimpse of Earth's surface. What they saw surprised them greatly. Rolling hills of green vegetation stretched toward distant mountains, and a river wound through the landscape like a silver ribbon. The sky above was a brilliant blue that none of them had ever seen on their own gray homeworld. "It is beautiful," whispered Counselor Thrixna, and several others clicked in agreement. Perhaps this mission would not be so terrible after all. The ship landed smoothly on a designated platform, and the Corvani delegation gathered their ceremonial robes and translation devices before stepping onto the exit ramp. Warm air rushed over their exoskeletons, carrying strange scents that their sensory organs struggled to identify. A human female stood waiting for them at the bottom of the ramp, and Viralthus studied her carefully. She was tall for her species, with dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes the color of rich soil. She wore a crisp uniform decorated with symbols of rank that the translator identified as military honors. "Welcome to Earth," she said, and her voice was warm and steady as it passed through the translation matrix. "I am Commander Elena Vasquez, and I have been appointed as humanity's representative for your inspection visit. Please, follow me to my estate where we can discuss the terms of your evaluation in comfort." Viralthus performed the traditional Corvani bow of greeting, his upper limbs crossing over his thorax in a gesture of respect. "We thank you for your hospitality, Commander Vasquez. The Corvani Collective is honored to be the first delegation to formally inspect your world." The human smiled, and Viralthus noted the way her lips curved upward to reveal white teeth. The expression was meant to convey friendliness, according to his research, though it reminded him uncomfortably of a predator baring its fangs. They walked along a paved path that wound through gardens filled with colorful plants, and Viralthus marveled at the variety of life that seemed to flourish everywhere on this world. Insects buzzed through the air, and small feathered creatures sang from the branches of tall trees. "Your world is very different from ours," he observed, and Commander Vasquez nodded in understanding. "Earth is a diverse planet," she agreed. "We have deserts and forests and frozen wastelands and tropical jungles. Life has found a way to thrive in almost every environment." The estate came into view as they crested a small hill, and Viralthus saw a large dwelling surrounded by open fields and dense groves of trees. It seemed peaceful and pleasant, exactly the kind of location one would choose for important diplomatic meetings. He began to relax, and his mandibles clicked softly in contentment. Perhaps the warnings about humans had indeed been exaggerated. Perhaps this inspection would proceed without incident. Then the ground trembled beneath his segmented legs. Viralthus froze, and his compound eyes swiveled in every direction as he searched for the source of the vibration. The other Corvani diplomats clustered together in sudden fear, their crystalline shells rattling with nervous energy. Something was emerging from the tree line at the edge of the estate. The first creature stepped into the open, and Viralthus felt his spiracles constrict in horror. It was a massive four-legged beast covered in golden fur, with a thick mane surrounding its head like a crown of death. Its eyes were the color of molten amber, and when it opened its mouth, Viralthus saw teeth designed for crushing bone and tearing flesh. "By the eternal hive," gasped Counselor Phrixna, and her voice was barely a whisper of pure terror. But that was only the beginning. A second creature emerged from the shadows, and this one was even more terrifying. It was sleek and muscular, with orange and black stripes covering its enormous body. Its eyes were piercing yellow, and it moved with the fluid grace of a perfect killing machine. Massive paws concealed claws that could slice through Corvani exoskeleton like it was nothing. Several of the diplomats screamed, and two of them turned to run back toward the ship. Their legs scrambled uselessly on the unfamiliar ground, and they fell in a tangle of limbs and robes. Then came the third creature, and Viralthus thought his heart might stop beating entirely. It was colossal, towering over everything around it. Its skin was thick and gray like ancient stone, and four pillow-like legs supported a body that must have weighed more than their entire shuttle. But the most horrifying feature was the long serpentine appendage that hung from its face, a flexible trunk that swayed gently as the monster approached. Viralthus recognized these creatures from the Council's most restricted files. They were Class 7 apex predators, the most dangerous category of fauna that the Galactic Council had ever documented. Entire planets had been quarantined because of creatures far less deadly than these. Contact with such beasts was forbidden under penalty of immediate evacuation and orbital sterilization. And yet here they were, walking freely on the grounds of a diplomatic estate. The Corvani delegation huddled together in absolute terror, and Viralthus prepared himself for death. Surely these monsters would tear them apart in seconds. Surely this was the end of their mission and their lives. But then he noticed something strange. Commander Elena Vasquez was not running. She was not screaming or hiding or calling for weapons. Instead, she was walking directly toward the three forbidden creatures, and her face showed no fear at all. In fact, she was smiling. Viralthus watched in disbelief as the human approached the golden-maned beast, and he waited for the inevitable attack, the spray of red blood, the sounds of bones breaking. Instead, the creature lowered its massive head, and Commander Vasquez reached up with one small hand, and she scratched it behind the ears. The creature that could have killed every Corvani diplomat in seconds began to make a deep rumbling sound that vibrated through the air, and Viralthus could not understand what he was seeing. Commander Vasquez continued to scratch behind the beast's ears, and her fingers disappeared into the thick golden mane as if she had done this 1,000 times before. The massive predator leaned into her touch, and its eyes half closed in what appeared to be contentment. "This is impossible," whispered Viralthus, and his translation device crackled with the intensity of his disbelief. "This cannot be happening." He pulled up his data tablet with trembling limbs and accessed the Galactic Council's classified database of dangerous fauna. His compound eyes scanned the entries with growing horror. Panthera Leo, the first file read, and the accompanying image matched the golden-maned creature perfectly. The Pex terrestrial predator of Earth. Average mass 190 kilograms. Jaw pressure sufficient to crush bone and puncture armored plating. Hunts in coordinated groups called prides. Threat level maximum. Termination recommended upon contact. The second creature prowled closer, and Viralthus scrolled to its entry with numb terror. Panthera tigris, the database declared. solitary ambush predator, superior in single combat to Panthera leo, known to successfully hunt prey 5 times its own mass, possesses retractable claws capable of disemboweling targets in a single strike, threat level maximum, avoid at all costs. And then there was the third creature, the gray giant that seemed to block out the very sky. Elephas maximus. Megafauna classification. Average mass 5,000 kilograms. Possesses prehensile appendage, capable of lifting 300 kilograms and performing delicate manipulation. Documented instances of destroying armored military vehicles. Highly intelligent with complex social structures. Threat level extreme. Orbital strike authorized if encountered in hostile context. 3 Class 7 predators stood before the Corvani delegation, and the human was treating them like they were harmless pets. Commander Vasquez, Viralthas managed to say, and his voice came out as a high-pitched squeak that the translator struggled to process. Please step away from those creatures immediately. We must evacuate and call for military support. The human turned to look at him, and confusion crossed her features. What are you talking about, Ambassador? Those are forbidden creatures, Phrixin added, and the counselor's crystalline body was shaking so badly that she could barely stand. The Galactic Council has classified them as maximum threat. They should not be allowed to roam free anywhere near sentient beings. Commander Vasquez looked at the 3 massive animals, and then she looked back at the terrified Corvani delegation, and suddenly she began to laugh. The sound was strange to Corvani ears, a series of rhythmic exhalations that the translator labeled as an expression of amusement. But Viralthas could not understand what she found funny about their imminent deaths. You mean Simba and Raja and Tembo? The human asked, and she gestured toward each creature as she spoke their names. They are not going to hurt you. They are my friends. Friends? The word echoed through the translation matrix, and Viralthas was certain that there had been some error. No sentient being could be friends with apex predators. The very concept violated every law of survival that governed the galaxy. The striped creature, the one called Raja, padded toward Commander Vasquez on massive silent paws. It moved with the fluid grace of a perfect hunter, each step controlled and deliberate. Viralthas watched its muscles ripple beneath the orange and black fur, and he knew that this beast could cross the distance between them in seconds if it chose to attack. But it did not attack. Instead, the giant predator pushed its head against the human's chest, and she wrapped her arms around its thick neck in what appeared to be an embrace. The creature made a sound that was almost like the rumbling of a ground transport, deep and steady and strangely soothing. Is it purring? Asked one of the younger Corvani scientists, and her voice was filled with confused wonder. Tigers do not really purr like house cats, Commander Vasquez explained, and she continued to stroke the beast's striped fur. But Raja makes this chuffing sound when he is happy to see me. It means he is saying hello. The lion Simba had flopped onto its side in the grass, and its massive tail swished lazily back and forth. It yawned, displaying teeth that could puncture through Corvani armor plating, and then it began to groom its golden paw with its rough tongue. It looked, Viralthas thought with utter disbelief, almost relaxed. I do not understand, he said, and his mandibles clicked rapidly in agitation. These creatures are killers. Our database says they hunt and kill prey larger than themselves. How can you stand so close to them without fear? Commander Vasquez released the tiger and walked back toward the Corvani delegation, and her expression grew more serious. Your database is not wrong, Ambassador. Lions and tigers and elephants are indeed powerful and potentially dangerous animals. But they are not monsters. Then what are they? Demanded Counselor Phrixina. They are living beings, the human replied, and there was something in her voice that Viralthas could not quite identify. They have personalities and emotions and individual quirks. Simba loves to have his belly rubbed, and Raja is afraid of thunderstorms, and Tembo cries actual tears when she is sad. They are not killing machines. They are creatures with hearts and minds of their own. The elephant had been watching the conversation from a short distance away, and now it began to approach the group. Its massive feet made the ground shake with each step, and several Kovani diplomats whimpered in terror. "Please remain calm," Commander Vasquez said, and she held up her hands in a soothing gesture. "Tembo is very gentle. She is just curious about our visitors." The elephant stopped in front of Ambassador Viralthus, and he found himself staring up at a creature that weighed more than 50 Kovani combined. Its small dark eyes studied him with obvious intelligence, and its long trunk swayed gently in the air. Then the trunk extended toward him. Viralthus wanted to run, but his legs would not obey his commands. He stood frozen as the serpentine appendage approached his crystalline thorax. He could see the two finger-like projections at its tip, and he wondered if this was how his existence would end. The trunk touched his exoskeleton with surprising gentleness. It explored the surface of his thorax with delicate movements, tracing the patterns in his crystalline shell. It felt like being touched by a very soft and very curious child. Then the elephant exhaled through its trunk, and warm air washed over Viralthus in a gentle wave. "She is greeting you," Commander Vasquez said, and her voice was warm with affection. In elephant language, that breath is a sign of acceptance. It means she likes you. One of the younger diplomats, overwhelmed by terror and confusion and the complete reversal of everything she had been taught about dangerous fauna, collapsed unconscious onto the grass. No one moved to help her. They were all too busy staring at the elephant, who had now begun to sniff at Viralthus's ceremonial robes with obvious interest. "This is not possible," the ambassador whispered, but even as he spoke the words, he knew that he was witnessing something that would change the Galactic Council's understanding of humanity forever. Commander Vasquez led the shaken Kovani delegation toward her estate, and the three massive creatures followed along like obedient shadows. Simba the lion walked beside the human with his golden mane rippling in the breeze, and Raja the tiger prowled silently on her other side. And Tembo the elephant brought up the rear with her trunk swinging contentedly. Viralthus kept glancing back at the animals, unable to believe that they were walking so calmly alongside their group. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, to hide, to escape before the predators decided to attack. But the creatures showed no signs of aggression at all. They reached a large building with wide doors that slid open automatically, and Commander Vasquez gestured for her guests to enter. "Please, make yourselves comfortable. I will have refreshments brought for everyone." The interior of the estate was spacious and well lit, with high ceilings that could easily accommodate the elephant. Viralthus realized with growing wonder that the human had designed her home to include these massive animals. "You live with them?" asked Counselor Thrixna, and her voice was still shaky with lingering fear. "Of course," Commander Vasquez replied, and she settled onto a large cushioned seat. Simba immediately flopped down beside her and rested his enormous head on her lap. "I have raised all three of them since they were babies." The word echoed through the room, and Viralthus felt his mind struggling to process its implications. "Babies?" he repeated, and his translator device hummed with the effort of conveying his confusion. "You acquired these apex predators as infants?" "They were rescues," the human explained, and her hand moved automatically to stroke the lion's mane. Simba was found orphaned after poachers killed his mother. Raja was born in an illegal breeding facility and was going to be sold to collectors. Tembo was injured by a landmine near a wildlife reserve and needed extensive medical care. She paused, and her dark eyes grew soft with memory. I took them in when they were small enough to fit in my arms. I fed them and cared for them and nursed them through sickness and injury. They grew up knowing that I would always protect them, and they have never forgotten. The tiger had curled up on a massive cushion near the window, and sunlight streamed across its striped body. It looked, Viralthus thought, almost peaceful. Its yellow eyes were half closed, and its breathing was slow and steady. "But how can they trust you?" the ambassador asked, and genuine curiosity had begun to replace some of his terror. In our experience, predators see other beings only as threats or prey. There is no room for trust in that equation. Commander Vasquez smiled, and there was something almost sad in her expression. "Perhaps that is because your species never tried to build that trust." She looked down at Simba, who had begun to snore softly with his head still resting on her lap. Humans have always understood that other animals are not so different from us. They feel fear and joy, and love and grief. They form bonds with their families and mourn when those bonds are broken. They can learn to trust, if someone is willing to earn that trust. The elephant had wandered to a large trough filled with water, and she was using her trunk to spray the liquid over her gray back. Droplets scattered through the air and caught the light like tiny jewels. Tembo remembers the humans who hurt her. Commander Vasquez continued, and her voice grew quiet. She has scars on her legs from the landmine that nearly killed her. But she also remembers the humans who saved her, who spent months helping her heal, who stayed by her side through the pain and the fear. She reached out toward the elephant, and Tembo turned to look at her with those small, intelligent eyes. She chose to trust us, even after everything she had suffered. That is not the behavior of a mindless beast. That is the decision of a thinking and feeling being. Counselor Thrixna had been observing the animals with growing fascination, and now she stepped forward tentatively. "May I approach the tiger?" she asked, and her voice was barely above a whisper. Commander Vasquez nodded encouragingly. "Move slowly and let Raja see you coming. Do not make any sudden movements, and let him sniff your hand before you try to touch him." The Kovani counselor approached the sleeping tiger with trembling legs, and the massive creature lifted its head to watch her. Its yellow eyes tracked her movements, and its ears swiveled forward with obvious attention. Thrixna stopped a short distance away and extended one of her upper limbs, holding it steady despite her fear. The tiger rose to its feet, and every Kovani in the room tensed in anticipation of violence. But Raja simply padded toward the counselor with that fluid predator grace, and he lowered his massive head to sniff at her crystalline appendage. Warm breath washed over Thrixna's exoskeleton, and she could feel the power contained in the creature before her. One swipe of those massive paws could shatter her body into 1,000 pieces, but the tiger did not attack. Instead, Raja pushed his striped head against Thrixna's thorax in a gentle bump, and a deep rumbling sound began to emanate from his chest. "He likes you," Commander Vasquez said, and pride was evident in her voice. "That head bump is how tigers show affection. He is accepting you as a friend." Thrixna reached out with trembling limbs and touched the tiger's fur for the first time. It was softer than she had expected, thick and warm beneath her crystalline fingers. The creature leaned into her touch, and its rumbling grew louder. "This is incredible," the counselor breathed, and tears began to form in her compound eyes. "I have spent my entire life being taught that predators are enemies to be feared and destroyed. But this creature is showing me kindness." Viralth has watched the interaction with something approaching wonder. All of his training, all of his education, all of the warnings from the Galactic Council were being contradicted by what he was witnessing. The lion had woken from his nap and was now padding toward the ambassador, Simba's golden eyes fixed on Viralthus, and the Kovani felt his spiracles constrict with renewed fear. "Do not be afraid," Commander Vasquez said gently. Simba can sense your emotions. If you remain calm, he will remain calm. The lion stopped directly in front of Viral Thuz and sat down on his haunches. Up close, the creature was even more impressive than he had appeared from a distance. The thick mane framed a face of terrible beauty, and the amber eyes held depths of intelligence that the ambassador had never expected. Simba lifted one massive paw and placed it on Viral Thuz's lower limb. The weight was considerable, but the touch was gentle. The lion was not threatening him. The lion was reaching out to him. "Hello, Simba," Viral Thuz said softly, and his voice wavered with emotion. "I am Ambassador Viral Thuz of the Corvani Collective. It is very nice to meet you." The lion blinked slowly, and then it leaned forward and pressed its great head against the ambassador's thorax. The rumbling purr vibrated through Viral Thuz's entire body, and he felt something shift inside his heart. Fear began to transform into something else entirely. For the first time in his life, Viral Thuz understood that the galaxy was far more complex than he had ever imagined, and that humans possessed a gift that no other species had ever developed. They could turn enemies into friends. The afternoon sun had begun to set beyond the hills, and the Corvani delegation sat in Commander Vasquez's main hall with expressions of wonder on their crystalline faces. They had spent hours interacting with the three creatures, and their fear had slowly transformed into fascination. Simba was sprawled across the floor with three Corvani scientists examining his massive paws. The lion seemed to enjoy the attention, and his tail swished lazily back and forth as the aliens marveled at his retractable claws. Raja had claimed Counselor Thrixna as his personal companion, and the tiger followed her everywhere she went. Whenever she stopped moving, the massive predator would curl up beside her and rest his striped head on her crystalline legs. And Tembo had discovered that she enjoyed having her ears rubbed by alien hands, and several diplomats took turns reaching up to stroke the soft gray skin behind her massive ear flaps. Viral Thuz sat with Commander Vasquez, and his mind was overflowing with questions. "I must understand how this is possible," he said, and his mandibles clicked with intellectual urgency. "The Corvani achieved spaceflight by eliminating every dangerous creature on our homeworld. We believed that was the only path to civilization." The human nodded thoughtfully, and her dark eyes grew distant with memory. "Many species have followed that path," she agreed. "The Galactic Council's records show that most intelligent beings view predators as obstacles to be removed. It seems like the logical approach to survival. But humans chose differently," Viral Thuz pressed. "Why?" Commander Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft with something that the translator labeled as reverence. "Because our ancestors looked at the wolves that hunted them and saw something they recognized." She stood and walked to a large display screen on the wall. With a gesture, she activated it, and images began to appear. Tens of thousands of years ago, humans were prey animals. We were small and weak compared to the predators that shared our world. We had no claws or fangs or armor plating. By all logic, we should have been wiped out. The screen showed ancient images of early humans, small figures huddled around fires in a dangerous world. But instead of viewing predators as enemies to be destroyed, some of our ancestors had a different idea. They watched the wolves that hunted in packs, and they saw creatures that cared for their families and worked together and protected their young. She touched the screen, and the image changed to show wolves running alongside human hunters. They thought, what if we could be allies instead of enemies? What if we could hunt together instead of hunting each other? Viral Thuz leaned forward, his compound eyes fixed on the images. They approached wild predators and tried to befriend them. It took generations, Commander Vasquez confirmed. The first humans who tried probably failed. Many probably died. But some succeeded, and they passed that success on to their children. Over thousands of years, wolves that chose to live alongside humans became dogs, loyal companions who would protect human families with their lives. The screen showed images of dogs of all shapes and sizes, from tiny lap animals to massive working breeds. "We did not conquer wolves," the human said. "We invited them into our families, and they accepted." "And you did this with other creatures as well?" asked Counselor Thrixina, and Raj's ears perked up at the sound of her voice. "With many creatures," Commander Vasquez agreed. "Wildcats became house cats. Wild horses became our partners in travel and war. Falcons and hawks became our hunting companions. We even befriended animals that seemed impossible to tame." She gestured toward Tembo, who was now using her trunk to gently explore the ceremonial robes of a curious diplomat. "Elephants have worked alongside humans for thousands of years. They have carried us into battle and helped us build great structures and become beloved members of human communities." Viralthas accessed his data tablet and pulled up the Corvani historical archives. "My people took a very different approach," he said, and something like shame colored his voice. "When we encountered predators, we exterminated them. We poisoned their water sources and burned their habitats and hunted them until none remained." He scrolled through the files with growing discomfort. "We sterilized 3 moons because they contained life forms that we considered threatening. We killed billions of creatures because we believed it was the only way to be safe." "And were you safe?" Commander Vasquez asked gently. The ambassador paused, and his mandibles clicked in uncomfortable acknowledgement. "We were alone. We had eliminated every species that might have challenged us, and we became the only intelligent beings on our world. But we were not happy." He looked up at the human with new understanding in his compound eyes. "We never experienced what you are showing me. We never knew that predators could be friends. We never felt the warmth of a bond between different species." Commander Vasquez sat down beside him, and Simba immediately rose and padded over to join them. The lion settled his massive body against the ambassador's crystalline legs, and his warmth seeped through Viralthas' exoskeleton. "Humans are not braver than other species," the commander said softly. "We are simply more willing to take risks for the chance of connection. We look at something dangerous and terrifying, and instead of running away or attacking, we ask ourselves a question." "What question?" Viralthas asked, and his voice was barely a whisper. The human smiled, and her hand reached down to stroke the lion's golden mane. "We ask, could we be friends?" The simplicity of the question struck the ambassador like a physical blow. Such a small change in perspective, and yet it had led to such vastly different outcomes. The Corvani had built their civilization on fear and destruction, eliminating anything that threatened them. They had achieved safety, but at the cost of loneliness and isolation. Humans had built their civilization on hope and connection, reaching out to dangerous creatures and offering friendship. They had risked death and failure, but they had gained something precious in return. They had gained companions who loved them. Raja had fallen asleep with his massive head resting on Thrixina's crystalline thorax, and the counselor was stroking his striped fur with gentle movements. Her compound eyes were filled with an emotion that Viralthas had never seen in a Corvani before. Tembo was entertaining the diplomats with tricks, picking up objects with her trunk and placing them in careful patterns. The aliens laughed and applauded, and the elephants seemed to enjoy their appreciation. And Simba lay warm and heavy against Viralthas' legs, his great chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. "You have changed everything I believed about the galaxy," the ambassador said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "I came here expecting to evaluate humans for council membership. Instead, you have shown me that my own species has been walking the wrong path for thousands of years." Commander Vasquez placed her hand on his crystalline shoulder, and the gesture was surprisingly comforting. "It is never too late to choose a different path," she said. Perhaps this is the beginning of something new for both our peoples. Viralthus looked around the room at his fellow Corvani, each one bonding with creatures they had been taught to fear and hate. He saw joy in their faces, and wonder and hope. And he knew that when he returned to the Galactic Council, he would have a very different report to deliver. 3 weeks had passed since the Corvani delegation returned from Earth, and now Ambassador Viralthus stood before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Council. 1,000 species filled the vast chamber, their varied bodies creating a tapestry of colors and shapes that stretched as far as the eye could see. The Council Elder, an ancient being of pure energy who had guided the organization for millennia, pulsed with gentle light as he addressed the chamber. Ambassador Viralthus of the Corvani Collective, you have requested this special session to deliver your report on humanity. The Council awaits your findings. Viralthus stepped forward to the speaking platform, and his crystalline exoskeleton gleamed under the chamber's lights. He had rehearsed this moment many times, but now that it had arrived, he felt a strange calm settle over his heart. Honored council members, he began, and his voice carried clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. I was sent to Earth to evaluate humanity for membership in our organization. I was expected to assess their technology, their culture, their potential contributions to galactic civilization. He paused, and his compound eyes swept across the assembled representatives. But what I discovered on that blue planet was something far more significant than technology or culture. I discovered a species unlike any other in the known galaxy. Murmurs rippled through the chamber, and the energy being pulsed with increased interest. Please elaborate, Ambassador. The Galactic Council has classified certain creatures as forbidden fauna, Viralthus continued. Class 7 apex predators that are considered too dangerous for contact. Our standard protocol calls for immediate evacuation and orbital sterilization when such creatures are encountered. He activated the holographic display, and images of Simba, Raja, and Tembo appeared in the air above the speaking platform. Gasps and cries of alarm echoed through the chamber as representatives recognized the deadly creatures. During my visit to Earth, I encountered 3 of these forbidden creatures on the grounds of a diplomatic estate. I prepared myself for death, as any rational being would. I expected to watch my entire delegation be torn apart by these monsters. The chamber had gone completely silent, and every being present was focused on the Corvani ambassador. But that is not what happened, Viralthus said, and his voice grew soft with remembered wonder. Instead, I watched a human approach these apex predators and scratch them behind their ears. I watched these killing machines roll over and present their bellies for affection. I watched creatures that could destroy armored vehicles behave like beloved family pets. He touched the holographic display, and new images appeared. These showed the Corvani delegation interacting with the animals, touching them, playing with them, forming bonds of friendship that should have been impossible. The human who cared for these creatures explained something to me that changed my understanding of the galaxy. Viralthus continued. She told me that humans do not conquer dangerous beings. They do not destroy them or flee from them. Instead, they ask a simple question. The council elder pulsed with curiosity. What question? Could we be friends? The words hung in the air of the chamber, and Viralthus let them sink in before continuing. Humans have spent tens of thousands of years forming bonds with the deadliest creatures on their planet. They took wolves, pack hunters designed for killing, and transformed them into loyal companions called dogs. They took wildcats and horses and birds of prey and made them into partners and friends. He looked around the chamber at the 1,000 different species, each one representing civilizations that had achieved spaceflight through elimination and conquest. Most of us followed a different path. We destroyed anything that threatened us. We burned habitats and poisoned water sources and hunted predators to extinction. We believed that safety could only be achieved through annihilation. But humans chose connection over destruction, Myralthus declared. They chose love over fear, and in doing so, they developed a gift that no other species possesses. They can turn enemies into friends. A representative from the Vox Imperium, a species known for their aggressive expansion, spoke up. This is weakness, Ambassador. Forming bonds with predators is a sign of soft minds and poor judgment. Myralthus turned to face the Vox representative, and his mandibles clicked with something approaching amusement. Is it weakness? Consider what it means for a species to have the loyalty of apex predators. Consider what it means that the most dangerous creatures on their planet would die to protect them. He activated another holographic display, and this one showed Earth's history of warfare. Humans have ridden horses into battle and used dogs to track enemies and sent falcons to hunt for them. They have turned every relationship with an animal into a potential alliance. They do not just survive their predators. They recruit them. The chamber buzzed with discussion, and Myralthus raised his voice to be heard over the noise. Now imagine what will happen when humanity expands into the galaxy. Imagine them encountering the dangerous fauna of 1,000 worlds. Where we would see threats to be eliminated, they will see potential friends. Where we would call for orbital strikes, they will extend hands of friendship. He paused, letting the implications settle over the assembled representatives. In 100 years, humans will have allies on every world they visit. In 1,000 years, the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy will fight and die for their human companions. Is that weakness, honored representatives, or is it the most terrifying strength you have ever encountered? The Vox representative had gone silent, and something like fear flickered in his multiple eyes. The council elder pulsed with deep contemplation. What is your recommendation, Ambassador Myralthus? The Kovanni drew himself up to his full height, and his crystalline body gleamed with conviction. I recommend that the Galactic Council grant humanity full membership immediately. I recommend that we embrace them as allies before anyone else has the chance. I recommend that we position ourselves on the same side as the species that collects monsters. And why should we follow this recommendation? The elder asked. Myralthus looked around the chamber one final time, meeting the eyes of representatives from 1,000 worlds. Because if humanity ever goes to war, every predator they have ever befriended will fight beside them. Every creature that the galaxy fears will be their willing ally. And I would very much prefer that those monsters be fighting with us rather than against us. The vote was held that very day, and the result was nearly unanimous. Humanity was granted full membership in the Galactic Council, and the news was transmitted across 1,000 worlds. Species that had viewed humans with suspicion now looked at them with new respect, and some with carefully hidden fear. On Earth, Commander Elena Vasquez received the news with a quiet smile. She celebrated by taking Simba and Raja and Tembo for a walk through the hills surrounding her estate. The lion patted on one side of her, his golden mane rippling in the evening breeze. The tiger prowled on her other side, his yellow eyes scanning the horizon with contented alertness. And the elephant walked behind them, her trunk swaying gently as she hummed a sound that was almost like a song. 3 apex predators, 3 forbidden creatures, 3 beloved friends. They walked together under the stars of a galaxy that was only beginning to understand what humanity truly was. And somewhere in the halls of the Galactic Council, databases were being quietly updated. Homo sapiens, the new entry read. Approach with extreme caution. Do not threaten their companions. Highly recommended as allies. Befriend immediately. Far across the cosmos, species that had never heard of Earth began to receive this new information, and they studied it with great interest. A small blue planet had been granted full membership in galactic civilization, and the creatures who lived there had a gift unlike any other. They could turn monsters into friends. And that, the galaxy was slowly beginning to realize, made them the most dangerous species of all. Not because they conquered through violence, not because they destroyed through fear, but because they loved without limit, and that love could transform anything, even the most forbidden creatures in the known universe. Commander Vasquez knelt in the grass as the sun set behind the mountains, and 3 massive bodies pressed close around her. Simba's warm breath tickled her ear, and Raja's rumbling purr vibrated through her chest, and Tembo's trunk wrapped gently around her shoulders in an elephant embrace. She was surrounded by monsters, and she had never felt more safe. That was the human way. That was the gift her species had given the galaxy. And it would change everything, forever.